already did this one, almost 2 years later, and that bit has finally come full circle. So I don't think it's controversial to suggest that the Star Wars prequel trilogy is generally considered to be inferior to the original trifecta of A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Rightly or not, the general consensus tends to be that they're pretty poor, particularly given the monumental shadow cast by their predecessors. But there's a caveat to that, because even amongst some of those Star Wars fans who felt utterly betrayed by 1999's The Phantom Menace and the direction that it carved out for the 3 films, I've always encountered the admission that there are some real highlights throughout, some great moments and key qualities that stand out as superior to that which they're mired down in. Perhaps the most commonly cited examples of this throughout the trilogy are Ewan McGregor's depiction of Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Anyway, for me there has always been one particular idea that truly drew my interest, and that is the Podracing scene from Tatooine, in which a young Anakin Skywalker participates in a deadly race that takes these bizarre vehicles and the bizarre creatures driving them through the barren landscape of perhaps cinema's most iconic fictional world. It has its flaws, for sure, but as both a concept and a realised spectacle, this whole sequence always felt far more exciting to the kid version of me than the political discourse that infamously makes up much of the trilogy's runtime. And to this day I love the insight that they provided into the Star Wars universe. After all, said universe is surely the most documented and elaborated fictional realm that we as a species have come up with, at least in the past 50 years or so, if not throughout the history of cinema. And it was nice for me, as someone who hasn't read the novels or the comics or played all of the games or watched all of the TV shows, to develop an understanding of what goes on in this galaxy outside of just, like, Jedi stuff. When you have such a vast and riffable sci-fi universe as this, the investigation of the more everyday elements such as sports can really help to enrich the ever-expanding world of the fiction. But most of all, it's just cool as shit. So you can imagine my delight when I saw that there was a pod racing game that I got free as part of the Games with Gold benefits of my Game Pass subscription, and I downloaded it back in May with the intention of getting round to it when I had the time. And lucky me, I recently got sick, so have been unable to record the very long Atomic Heart video that I've got in the works. Even this one has been a struggle, and I'm still on the first page. But as such, I took the time to play through Star Wars Racer, and my god, it's glorious. I mainly want to keep this short and simple because anything else would be a dishonest representation of the game itself. Star Wars Racer has little to no story, very few details either visual or narrative, and doesn't consider itself with the context of the machinations of the Senate or the Sith threat that eventually envelops the galaxy. Instead, it's about getting to the finish line as fast as possible, that being your sole motivation and really the sole element of the experience. The game is only concerned with capturing the successes of the scenes that inspired it, and I would argue that it does so and then some. Now, the primary aspect of a high-stakes racing experience is, in my opinion, the sheer speed of it all. That's what you're there for, that's why it's so exciting. You should be tearing up tarmac at the kind of speeds where one slight error could be a fatal mistake, and Star Wars Racer has one key advantage there, in that it isn't having to use the traditional vehicles of a Forza or a Need for Speed. Instead, the hovering pod racers can cruise at speeds of 600 miles an hour and can even break the 1000 mile per hour barrier, which is 1600 kilometers an hour for all of my metric buddies out there. As such, the speed at which the environment zooms past is almost unfathomable, and it gives a sort of tangible quality to the futuristic technology of the setting that doesn't just revolve around flashing lights or laser guns, which is nice. What's not so nice, however, is blowing up and losing your lead to some cocky alien scum, so you're constantly on edge as you weave your way through the game's perilous circuits at near enough the speed of sound. And this helps to create a genuine intensity that I don't normally feel with racing games, in which my favourite aspects are usually the open world elements and customisable cars, to be honest, rather than the races themselves. Which I do enjoy, but not as much as I enjoy the freedom of the prior elements. In Star Wars Racer, the speed of the decisions that you have to make is frankly absurd, especially given the game's use of lighting and corners to obscure upcoming obstacles, meaning that there are often giant boulders and fatal collisions that remain hidden until the very last moment, and which demand lightning-quick reactions in order to be avoided. As an aside, most of the gameplay that you're seeing doesn't even have me using the boost function, which increases your speed by a couple of hundred miles an hour at least. And that's because I didn't know about it for most of the time that I was playing this game, but rest assured, even the highest speeds that you're seeing here could be pushed up at least another couple of 100 miles an hour. The game reminded me of the original Sonic the Hedgehog, a title designed to be blundered on repeat by its players until they reach such a point where they know the level like the back of their hand, and as such are able to work their way through it despite the fact that it's moving too fast for them to process the emerging enemies and obstructions. Upon succeeding, the pent-up frustrations of each failure are converted into a sense of achievement, which is thoroughly enhanced by the missteps made in previous attempts. Now, this is by no means a consistent philosophy throughout Star Wars Racer, but there are certain courses that demand very specific approaches as a result of their speed, allowing for some genuine challenges and decent escalation of the game's difficulty as you approach its later stages and are faced with those split-second decisions at speeds that you can't even comprehend. It's difficult really to talk about how much of an advantage this speed is to the game, but I'd argue that it is the core element of its identity and as such is a crucial aspect of more or less everything that the game does. I don't want to linger for too long on this idea, but as an example of what it enables the game to achieve, I would suggest that Star Wars Racer facilitates the first good recreation of that one scene from The French Connection that I've ever seen in video game form. Others have come close, but never seem able to replicate the batshit velocity of that truly iconic moment in the cinematic history of petrolhead chase sequences, especially when you learn about how exactly it was filmed. Star Wars Racer does do that though, especially when you use that number plate camera angle that most racing games have and which most do make feel fast, but never, in my experience, to this blistering extent. Also, as an aside, one of my favourite racing movies is Le Mans 66. That's Ford v Ferrari for my American viewers. And one of my favourite elements of it is the claustrophobic intensity of its race scenes, and particularly those during the 24-hour Le Mans, which makes its races seem so fast by comparison to actual coverage of, for instance, Formula 1, which is much faster but is made to look like it takes place at jogging speed. So I'm constantly yearning for a pod racing movie that's shot similarly to that film, and I'm constantly depressed that it's never going to happen. But another key feature of the game is how it looks, and as with so much of the Star Wars universe, it seems to me that one of Racer's key strengths is the design work that is allowed to flourish in this world full of new characters and iconic vehicles. The aliens in question, and the machines in which they compete, give each race something a little new, and help to paint a colourful image of a more fleshed out and well realised world of pod racing. Adding to that the game's luscious locations, we get a title that, though simple in its visuals, really feels galaxy-spanning in a way that it simply has no right to be. Although you can't afford to become distracted by the settings and the artistic intention behind what's going on, it prevents it from being the same old race on repeat, which is extra impressive as a lot of its locations are almost exactly that. See, we frequently revisit tracks throughout the game, but they are made interesting all over again by virtue of the fact that they have been rearranged and spiced up with a couple of new sections, introducing a mentally demanding aspect as you travel through many of the same obstacles as before, only in different orders, forcing us to override our pre-established muscle memory in favour of a new set of manoeuvres that just builds on what we know without reusing it, which is much more interesting to me than if we just kept visiting the same 7 or 8 worlds on repeat. Yes, ideally there would be more places to go to, but at the same time this game is half a gigabyte and came out in 1999, so sometimes you have to set your expectations for that kind of thing. And this came to a head with the final race of the game's story mode, which is a new rendition of the Tatooine race from the film. It's perhaps the toughest race in the story, and winning it unlocked its antagonist, Sebulba, the villainous racer whom Anakin defeats in order to claim victory in the Phantom Menace. And the circuit is highly faithful to that from the film, featuring all of its most iconic moments and thus feeling like an appropriate culmination of the events of the game, which bows out with an excellent ode to the scenes that inspired it, giving me perhaps the most successful recreation of another scene that I've ever seen in a video game. So that rules. And most of all, I'm just glad that I got this tiny story, well, not even really a story, but that I got to spend time in this undeniably awesome area of the Star Wars universe, playing their sports on a console as kids in our world do with FIFA or whatever. It's a short experience that's definitely replayable and which has different game modes and multiplayer if you get bored of just working your way through the tournaments, so I definitely recommend checking it out. It is apparently like £12.50 right now on the Microsoft Store, which is maybe a bit more than what I pay for a few hours of fun, but then maybe this is right up your street, and being ill I did work my way through it more quickly than most probably would, so maybe you'd have more time to enjoy it than I did. Not to mention that I got it for free because it was on Games with Gold relatively recently. But that said, there's bound to be a cheaper copy somewhere that you can get your hands on, whether it's second hand or whatever I'm sure that you could find it for less. So if you're into racing games from the late 90s and early noughties, or especially if you're into like kart racing games or others that prioritize fun over realism, then I definitely suggest that you go out of your way to experience this game for yourself. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed today's video about what I would call one of the best pleasant surprises of my past few years in video games. And if you have any thoughts on the game, or even on this video, then please do let me know in the comments down below. So thanks again for your time, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Alright, I think that's it. Goodbye.